My wife's twin sister pretended to be their mom for 12 years. Now cancer is revealing their darkest secret. I, 43M, never wanted to write this post, but after what happened last weekend, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. For 12 years, I've carried this secret, watching my kids grow up wondering why their mother abandoned them. I thought I was protecting them, but now I'm not so sure. It started on what seemed like a normal Tuesday evening. I was heading home early from work to surprise my wife. We'd been married for 8 years at that point, and things had been tense lately. The kids were at my parents' place for their weekly sleepover, so I thought we could have a nice dinner, talk things through. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed her car wasn't there, which was odd since she usually worked from home on Tuesdays. I went inside, thinking maybe she'd walk to the grocery store nearby. That's when I heard her voice coming from upstairs. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but what I heard made my blood run cold. He can't ever know, she was saying. The kids, they're better off not knowing either. We've kept this up for so long already. My first thought was that she was having an affair. I wish it had been that simple. I stood there, frozen at the bottom of the stairs, as she continued talking. The next words changed everything. The swap was perfect. No one ever questioned it. Not even him. I should have confronted her right then. Instead, I quietly left the house and drove around for hours, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. When I finally came home that night, she acted completely normal, asking about my day as if nothing was wrong. For the next few weeks, I started paying more attention. Looking back, there had been signs I'd ignored. The way she sometimes hesitated before responding to our kids' questions about her childhood. How she never quite looked comfortable in family photos with her twin sister. The subtle differences in their mannerisms that I'd attributed to them just being different people. The truth came out in pieces. First, it was the mysterious phone calls. Then the secret meetings with her sister that she thought I didn't know about. Finally, the envelope of documents I found hidden in her craft room while looking for wrapping paper. My wife, or rather, the woman I thought was my wife, wasn't who she claimed to be. She was her twin sister. They'd switched places years ago, before I even met her. The woman I married had been living her sister's life while my real wife, well, that's where things get complicated. I confronted her sister one night after the kids were asleep. She broke down immediately, confessing everything. The original switch had been temporary, just a joke between sisters that went too far. But then my real wife met someone else during that time, someone she claimed was her soulmate. Instead of coming clean, they decided to make the switch permanent. The woman I'd married had been trying to protect her sister's happiness, she claimed. She'd grown to love me and the kids, even though none of this had been her original plan. But living a lie had slowly eaten away at her, especially watching our children grow up never knowing their real mother. I was furious, devastated, and confused all at once. How could I not have noticed? How could anyone maintain such an elaborate deception for so long? The worst part was, I couldn't even confront my real wife. She'd moved to another country years ago, starting a new life with her soulmate. That was 12 years ago. My wife left shortly after her confession, unable to bear the weight of her deception any longer. I told the kids she needed time to figure things out, that sometimes adults make complicated decisions. They were young enough then to accept that explanation, though I saw the hurt in their eyes. I've spent years protecting them from the truth, watching them grow up with questions I couldn't answer. Their aunt, the woman who'd pretended to be their mother, sends birthday cards and occasional gifts, but never visits. Their real mother has never reached out, not once. Last weekend, everything changed. Their aunt showed up at our door, tears in her eyes. They deserve to know, she said. She's dying, and they deserve to know everything. I stood in the doorway, staring at my former sister-in-law, the woman who had lived as my wife for years. She looked older, more worn down than I remembered. The kids were at college now, and for a moment, I considered turning her away to protect their peace of mind. But something in her expression told me this wasn't about her guilt anymore. She sat at our kitchen table, the same one where we'd had countless family dinners, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said quietly. She has maybe 3 months left. The words hung heavy in the air between us. My real wife, their actual mother, was dying in a hospital halfway across the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd abandoned her family for what she thought would be a better life. And now she wanted to make amends before it was too late. She's been asking for them, my former sister-in-law continued. Every day. The doctors say the guilt is eating her up faster than the cancer. She pulled out her phone, showing me recent photos. I barely recognized the woman in them. Gone was the vibrant person I'd fallen in love with, replaced by someone who looked haunted by her choices. The past 12 years flashed through my mind. Every time our daughter won a swimming competition, every time our son made the honor roll, every Christmas morning and scraped knee and midnight fever, she'd missed it all. By choice. And now she wanted to say goodbye? What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The weight of this decision felt impossibly heavy. Just tell them the truth. Let them decide if they want to see her. They're adults now. They can handle it. She paused, pulling out a worn envelope. And there's more they need to know. The envelope contained letters, dozens of them, never sent. They were dated throughout the years, addressed to our children on their birthdays, holidays, and random days in between. Their mother had written to them all this time, pouring out her regrets, her explanations, her love, but she'd never had the courage to send them. I read through them as my former sister-in-law sat silently. Each letter revealed pieces of the story I hadn't known. The original switch had been her idea, not her sister's. She'd been struggling with postpartum depression after our second child, feeling trapped in a life she hadn't been sure she wanted. The temporary switch with her sister was supposed to give her a brief escape, a chance to clear her head. But during those few weeks away, she'd reconnected with an old flame from college who was working in Europe. One thing led to another, and what started as an escape turned into an exit strategy. Her sister, who'd always been the more responsible one, agreed to maintain the charade temporarily, not wanting to destroy our family with the scandal. Weeks turned into months, and before they knew it, they were in too deep to come clean. The letters showed her gradual realization of what she'd lost. She'd watched our children grow up through social media and her sister's secret updates. Her perfect, new life hadn't been so perfect after all. Her relationship with the old flame had ended years ago, but shame and fear had kept her from trying to come back. As I finished reading, my former sister-in-law spoke again. There's something else. She pulled out another photo, more recent than the others. It showed a young boy, maybe 10 years old. She has another son. He's been asking about his siblings. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Our children had a half-brother they'd never known about. The complexity of the situation had just multiplied exponentially. My phone buzzed, a text from our daughter about coming home for the weekend. She and her brother had been planning a surprise visit already. The timing was either perfect or terrible, depending on how you looked at it. They'll be here on Friday, I said. Both of them. She nodded, understanding the implications. I'll come back then. We should tell them together. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, being their mother, even temporarily, was the best thing that ever happened to me, and the hardest thing I ever had to give up. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen for hours, reading and rereading the letters. How do you tell your children that their entire childhood was built on a lie? That the woman they remembered as their mother was actually their aunt? That their real mother had been living a separate life, had even had another child? I thought about every time they'd asked about their mother over the years. Every carefully worded explanation, every omitted truth. I told myself I was protecting them, but maybe I'd just been protecting myself from having to face the reality of our situation. The photo of their half-brother stared up at me from the table. He had their mother's eyes, the same ones our daughter had inherited. Would they see it too? Would they want to meet him? Would they want to see their mother before? The sound of the garage door opening startled me from my thoughts. My daughter had come home early, probably hoping to surprise me. I quickly gathered up the letters and photos, shoving them back into the envelope. But as I turned around, she was already standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the scattered papers I hadn't managed to hide in time. Dad, her voice wavered slightly. What's going on? I looked at my daughter standing in the doorway, her weekend bag still slung over her shoulder, and realized the moment I'd been dreading for 12 years had arrived sooner than expected. Her brother wouldn't be here until Friday, but I couldn't lie to her now. Not when she'd already seen the evidence scattered across our kitchen table. Sit down, honey, I said, pulling out a chair. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. She sat, her eyes never leaving the envelope I was still clutching. I could see her trying to process the familiar handwriting on the visible letters, handwriting that wouldn't match her childhood memories. For the next hour, I told her everything. About the switch, the deception, her real mother, and the aunt who'd raised her. She sat in silence, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. When I finally finished, she got up without a word and walked out to the back porch, her thinking spot since she was a teenager. I gave her space, watching through the window as she paced back and forth, phone in hand. After what felt like hours, she came back inside. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "I need to see the letters," she said. We spent the next few hours reading through them together. She asked questions, so many questions, and I answered as honestly as I could. When we got to the photo of her half-brother, she stared at it for a long time. "Does this mean the mom in my memories?" She wasn't. She couldn't finish the sentence. "She loved you," I said firmly. "Both of them did, in their own ways. Your aunt, she didn't have to stay, to raise you as her own. She chose to, until the guilt became too much." My daughter nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling my brother. He needs to hear this now, not Friday. And he needs to hear it from you." An hour later, my son was on video call. I watched my daughter's face as she listened to the story a second time, catching details she'd missed through her initial shock. When I finished, the silence on both ends was deafening. "The woman in the hospital," my son finally said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "Our real mother. She's dying?"
Yes.
"And she wants to see us?" "Only if you want to. Both of you. It's your choice." They looked at each other through the screen, having one of those silent conversations siblings sometimes have. My daughter was the first to speak. "We need to meet our aunt first. The one who raised us. I have questions for her." My son nodded in agreement. "I'm catching the next flight home. Don't do anything until I get there." The next few days were a blur. My former sister-in-law came back, this time facing both of my children. She answered their questions with painful honesty. About the switch, about their mother's struggles, about her own role in the deception. She showed them more recent photos of their mother and more pictures of their half-brother. "He knows about you," she told them. "Your mother. She's been telling him stories about his brave big sister and smart big brother. He wants to meet you, but everyone understood that had to be your choice." My children spent hours talking privately, sometimes including their aunt in their discussions. I gave them space, knowing this was something they needed to process in their own way. When they finally came to me with their decision, their faces were resolute. "We want to go see her," my daughter said. "Not because we've forgiven her, but because we need answers only she can give us. And we want to meet our brother," my son added. "He's innocent in all this. He deserves to know his siblings." 2 weeks later, we were on a plane. My former sister-in-law had arranged everything, including our first meeting with their half-brother at a park near the hospital. He was shy at first, but when my daughter showed him a magic trick she'd learned in college, his face lit up with the same smile I remembered seeing on her face at that age. The hospital meeting was harder. Their mother was frail, but her eyes were clear. She cried when she saw them, trying to reach out with hands weakened by illness. My children stood frozen in the doorway until their half-brother took their hands and pulled them forward. "I know sorry isn't enough," she whispered, "but I need you to know. Letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. Not the switch itself, that was wrong, but temporary. The real mistake was being too cowardly to switch back, to face what I'd done." They talked for hours. About her depression, her fears, her regrets. About their lives, their achievements, their struggles. About their half-brother, who sat quietly in the corner, drawing pictures for his new siblings. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. That was 3 weeks ago. We're back home now, trying to navigate this new reality. My children talk to their half-brother every day through video calls. Their aunt, both aunts, the one who raised them and the one who gave birth to them, are part of their lives now, each relationship complicated in its own way. Their mother is getting weaker. The doctors say it won't be long now. My children are planning another visit next week, this time bringing photo albums from their childhood. Not to hurt her with what she missed, they said, but to share who they became in her absence. I don't know if this story has a moral. Life isn't always about clear rights and wrongs. Sometimes it's about the choices we make when every option feels wrong, and how we live with the consequences. Sometimes it's about finding forgiveness in unexpected places, or learning that love can take many forms. All I know is that my children are stronger than I ever imagined, and that the truth, however painful, was something they deserved to know. They're building relationships with their birth mother in the time she has left, getting to know their brother, and healing old wounds with their aunt. It's messy and complicated and beautiful in its own way. Maybe that's what family really is. Not the perfect story we wish we had, but the complicated one we're brave enough to face together.